The Velorian Consortium spanned the known galaxy with a reach that few civilizations could even fathom. Elegant in structure, uncompromisingly disciplined, and obsessively logical, their civilization embodied order at a near-perfect level. Their starships, graceful and symmetrical, moved through the cosmos like clockwork, timed to precision and maintained through procedures defined millennia ago. Their cities sparkled with crystalline clarity, meticulously organized in geometric perfection, reflecting their unwavering pursuit of efficiency and logic. Within the consortium, life had become a perpetual dance of routine and predictability. Decisions flowed downward from an immense bureaucracy designed to neutralize uncertainty and eliminate variability. Individual thought existed only within narrow parameters, ensuring a society that evolved with precision and never strayed from the course their ancestors had charted. Their encounters with other civilizations had largely been uneventful, as most either submitted quietly to their dominance or were quickly outmaneuvered by superior tactics and technology. Any resistance was quashed swiftly, logically, and decisively. The consortium's supremacy was unchallenged and seemingly eternal, until, that is, humanity appeared on their radar. Humanity, a fledgling species confined to a small star system in a remote arm of the galaxy, first drew the consortium's attention purely by chance. A passing Velorian survey ship registered anomalous electromagnetic emissions, archaic forms of communication bouncing chaotically through space. Intrigued, yet wary, they dispatched a small expedition to study the source. Upon arrival in the Sol system, the Velorians observed humanity through remote drones and stealth satellites. They witnessed a civilization unlike any they had previously encountered. Humans lived within chaotic, unstructured societies, racked by division, conflict, and illogical decision-making. They warred among themselves frequently, destroying resources and life in pursuit of intangible concepts such as freedom, power, and honor. Their technological advancement, while intriguing, was inconsistent and haphazardly executed. Initially, the consortium considered humanity a curiosity at best, a barbaric relic at worst, certainly not worth serious attention or interaction. As far as Velorians could discern, humanity was likely to destroy itself before it ever developed sufficiently to warrant the consortium's concern. However, a small faction within the consortium's research division recommended cautious observation rather than outright dismissal. To them, humanity presented an intriguing anomaly. Where the Velorians valued precision, humans flourished amidst uncertainty. Where Velorians prized logic, humans thrived on emotion and passion. Some Velorians hypothesized that humanity might hold hidden strengths or insights that a purely logical species had long forgotten. Yet, such voices were quickly silenced by the dominant majority, who viewed humanity as hopelessly primitive. Thus, humanity was filed away in the consortium archives as a marginal curiosity, observed, documented, and quickly forgotten. Even as the Velorian research vessels departed humanity's home system, their attention shifted to more pressing matters. New systems awaited colonization, diplomatic disputes demanded resolution, and the finely balanced galactic economy needed managing. Humanity quickly faded from consortium thought. Years passed, and the consortium returned to its comfortable routine. The galaxy operated like an immense machine, predictable and perfectly managed. Consortium society evolved incrementally, refining its logic-based approach to governance and maintaining peace through the strictest regulation. No species challenged their order. None dared defy their logic. In quiet moments, certain Velorian researchers who had glimpsed humanity's disorderly society occasionally pondered the forgotten primitives. These fleeting curiosities lingered briefly, soon displaced by more pressing logical pursuits. Unbeknownst to them, humanity was rapidly advancing, building its civilization and technology, creating societies unlike anything the consortium had ever experienced. Across the immense gulf separating humanity from Velorian space, humans continued to invent, struggle, and aspire. The Velorians' brief reconnaissance had been utterly missed by humanity itself, which remained unaware of the broader galactic community. Human eyes remained fixed firmly inward, toward their own seemingly insurmountable problems and their endless quest to overcome them. Meanwhile, at the heart of Velorian space, a great council convened to celebrate a new era of unchallenged prosperity. Their civilization was expanding efficiently, methodically. Their dominance was absolute. Their logic, it seemed, was flawless. Humanity had long since vanished from their concerns, reduced to nothing more than an obscure footnote in a research archive. Yet deep in the vastness of space, beyond Velorian territory, a cold, unknowable darkness stirred. The galaxy, comfortably stable for millennia under Consortium rule, was about to be shaken violently from its complacency. A threat the Velorians neither anticipated nor understood waited patiently, eager to dismantle their perfectly ordered existence. The ancient enemy, the Void Swarm, was awakening, and far across the galaxy, unnoticed and underestimated, humanity continued forward, forging a future that was unpredictable, flawed, and beautifully chaotic. Soon, the Consortium would learn just how important those very qualities could be. But for now, humanity remained quietly ignored, their potential overlooked and their existence all but forgotten. Thus, the Velorian Consortium, serene in their arrogance, continued their ordered and logical march across the stars, never realizing the power held within the primitive species they had dismissed. A power of unpredictability, resilience, and chaotic ingenuity that would soon become their greatest asset, and possibly their only hope. In the deepest regions of space, far beyond the gleaming, orderly worlds of the Velorian Consortium, darkness stirred. A shadow had awakened, an ancient force older than the Consortium itself. Known only through whispers and fragmented records, this cosmic horror was called the Void Swarm. A legend once thought to be merely an abstract cautionary tale had suddenly taken physical form. An enigmatic entity composed of innumerable life forms operating with a unified yet incomprehensible purpose. Initially, Velorian border patrols noticed subtle irregularities along the Consortium's expansive outer boundaries. Communication relays vanished inexplicably. Patrol ships disappeared without a trace, leaving no debris, no distress calls, not even a clue as to their fate. These disruptions were minor anomalies at first, isolated enough to dismiss as minor technical failures or navigational accidents. Yet the logical, cautious Velorians dispatched scouts to investigate, driven by their meticulous adherence to procedure. The first true sighting of the Void Swarm was recorded near a remote star system on the galaxy's outer edge. A Velorian exploratory fleet arrived to find entire planets completely stripped of life and resources, leaving nothing but barren rock orbiting silently beneath indifferent stars. It was as though all energy, all vitality, had simply been drained away, leaving behind emptiness and ruin. Even more unsettling, sensors struggled to fully register the presence of the enemy, detecting only shadows flickering at the edge of their instruments. Readings inconsistent, illogical, impossible. When the swarm finally revealed itself fully, the Velorian observers watched in horrified disbelief. An immense cloud of black, shifting shapes, constantly rearranging, surged toward the Velorian fleet with breathtaking speed. Attempts at logical communication were futile. The swarm's movements defied predictive algorithms, their patterns erratic, driven by no discernible motive other than destruction. In the ensuing chaos, the Velorian ships, renowned for their superior defensive capabilities, were torn apart effortlessly, their sophisticated systems failing against the swarm's seemingly irrational assault. Survivors returned home with distressing reports, sending waves of unease through the Consortium's highly ordered society. The Velorians had dominated the galaxy for millennia precisely because they excelled at anticipating, understanding, and controlling threats through cold logic and calculated precision. Yet, Suddenly, they faced an enemy whose behavior seemed completely devoid of rationality. The Void Swarm operated in ways that rendered all existing defense strategies meaningless. Even the most advanced predictive algorithms faltered, unable to model or comprehend the enemy's tactics. As news of this unstoppable threat spread, panic began to stir beneath the consortium's carefully maintained veneer of calm efficiency. Leadership councils convened emergency meetings, urgently seeking solutions to this unprecedented crisis. Yet debate, usually so orderly and methodical, quickly deteriorated into confusion and indecision. Logical analysis simply produced paradoxes and contradictions when applied to the swarm, leaving the Velorian elite paralyzed by uncertainty for the first time in their civilization's history. Within mere weeks, the Void Swarm expanded its devastating assault, breaching Velorian space with shocking ease. Consortium star systems fell one after another, consumed by the Void without apparent logic or mercy. Entire worlds were evacuated hurriedly, while military fleets scrambled to organize meaningful resistance. But each counterattack, planned with meticulous care and executed flawlessly according to Velorian strategy, met only catastrophic defeat. The swarm's incomprehensible behavior continued to defy rational military doctrine, leaving consortium strategists helpless. Every engagement with the swarm resulted in staggering losses. Starships designed with the finest technology, constructed according to strict mathematical perfection, crumbled under assaults they could neither predict nor counter. The swarm struck randomly, shifting targets abruptly, seemingly attacking weaknesses the Velorians themselves had never even considered. The consortium's advanced artificial intelligences attempted to decipher a pattern in the chaos, desperately searching for a hidden logic behind the enemy's seemingly random actions. Yet each calculation yielded only frustrating ambiguity. As the Void Swarm pressed relentlessly deeper into consortium territory, the once unified Velorian population fragmented. Societal order eroded under stress, revealing deep-seated vulnerabilities long concealed by their obsession with structure and predictability. Without clear instructions from above, citizens struggled to respond, accustomed only to absolute certainty. Panic erupted as their carefully constructed reality dissolved beneath the unpredictable tides of war. As desperation grew, some Velorian leaders proposed increasingly radical measures. They considered sacrificing entire sectors of space as decoys, attempting to predict where the Void Swarm might strike next. But even these sacrifices failed, as the swarm repeatedly defied predictions, leaving only devastation in its wake. Despair began to seep into the core of Velorian civilization. A grim realization dawned upon their leaders. Their greatest strength, rigid logic, had suddenly become their most debilitating weakness. They were fighting an enemy that thrived in chaos and unpredictability, a foe that found strength precisely where Velorians saw only disorder and irrationality. To defeat such an enemy required something utterly foreign to their minds. Spontaneity, creativity, improvisation, concepts they had long dismissed as inefficient, irrational, and primitive. Amid the growing turmoil, whispers resurfaced among some consortium scholars about a forgotten civilization, a species that embodied everything Velorians were not. Humanity, the overlooked primitives, suddenly returned to the forefront of scholarly debate. Could these irrational beings offer something the Velorians themselves lacked? Even as consortium leadership continued to struggle, the Void Swarm intensified its assault, moving inexorably toward the heart of Velorian civilization. Worlds of glittering efficiency and mathematical harmony burned beneath the swarm's merciless advance. The Velorians stood on the brink of annihilation, their carefully ordered galaxy unraveling around them. Desperation forced them to reconsider ideas they had previously scorned. Humanity, dismissed as primitive and chaotic, was no longer a curiosity. It had become their final, desperate hope. The consortium, humbled and afraid, faced the unthinkable, survival might require embracing the chaos they had long rejected. With nowhere else to turn, the Velorians prepared to reach out across the stars toward Earth, humanity's homeworld, in a desperate gamble for their very existence. With Consortium territory burning and the Void Swarm rapidly advancing toward the core worlds, panic and disorder were beginning to fracture Velorian society at every level. Star systems that had thrived peacefully under precise and predictable governance for centuries were now abandoned, fleeing the ruthless enemy. Each devastating defeat had eroded the Velorians' confidence in their once infallible logical methods, leaving their leadership councils uncertain, divided, and grasping desperately for solutions. Deep within the crystalline spires of the Consortium capital world of Veloria Prime, a solemn and urgent assembly convened. The great council chamber, usually a place of serene deliberation, now buzzed with anxious energy. The Consortium's top strategists, scholars, and administrators argued fervently over how to halt their civilization's rapid collapse. "It is undeniable that our current methods have utterly failed us," pronounced High Chancellor Zaloras, the eldest and most respected voice on the council. His words, usually calm and measured, now carried a note of desperation. "Our attempts to model the enemy's behavior with logical algorithms continue to prove meaningless. The Void Swarm defies every predictive calculation." Around him, fellow leaders murmured their agreement, many still stunned by the brutal reality unfolding across the Consortium. For a civilization built upon rationality, logic, and absolute order, the Void Swarm represented an existential crisis far beyond the destruction of worlds. It was an assault on their very identity. Yet one voice, quietly persistent, began to rise among the chaos. Commander Erevic, a military analyst known for unconventional thinking within Velorian ranks, stood up hesitantly, aware his next words might well be branded as heresy. "My fellow counselors," Erevic began slowly, his voice echoing through the chamber, "perhaps it is time to acknowledge our greatest weakness. We have spent millennia perfecting logic, but the Void Swarm is an enemy that weaponizes chaos and unpredictability against us. Our defeat is inevitable unless we adapt immediately." His proposal drew uneasy silence. Many eyes turned toward him, filled with both curiosity and distrust. Yet Erevic continued, emboldened by urgency. "We need a different perspective, one untouched by our rigid ways. We need creativity, emotional instinct, and unorthodox strategies that defy logical prediction. I propose that we consider reaching out to humanity." Instantly, the chamber erupted in outrage. Voices rose sharply, accusing Erevic of desperation-driven madness. Humanity, after all, had long been considered primitive, irrational, disorderly beings not worthy of respect, let alone trust. To ask them for aid felt humiliating, almost unthinkable. But Erevic was prepared, stepping forward with greater resolve. "I understand the shock. We dismissed humanity because they appeared chaotic and irrational, but precisely these traits may be what can save us. Human civilization thrives on unpredictability, improvisation, emotional resilience, concepts entirely foreign to us. Their way of war defies logic, and that is exactly why it might succeed where ours fails." Arguments raged throughout the chamber. Some counselors vehemently rejected the idea, clinging desperately to their old doctrines, terrified by the implications of relying on a species so far beneath their standards. Others, however, silently weighed Erevic's argument with growing uncertainty, acknowledging privately that conventional solutions had only brought ruin. Ultimately, after hours of debate and heated disagreement, the High Chancellor finally silenced the chamber with a decisive gesture. With great reluctance and weariness in his voice, he spoke. "Commander Erevic may speak the uncomfortable truth. We have exhausted every logical strategy and achieved nothing. If there remains even a slim chance that humanity could turn the tide, then pride and prejudice must not prevent us from exploring it. We must accept the humiliation inherent in this choice, because the alternative is annihilation. The room fell silent again, heavy with reluctant acceptance. Their decision marked an unprecedented turning point in Consortium history, one filled with uncertainty and dread. The once mighty Velorians, lords of logic and order, were forced to turn for salvation to the very species they had once ridiculed. Preparations began swiftly. A diplomatic delegation, spearheaded by Erevik himself, was rapidly assembled. They would approach humanity directly, admitting openly the Consortium's desperation. Their diplomatic overtures would offer cooperation and support in exchange for humanity's insight into their chaos-driven creativity, strategies the Velorians could scarcely comprehend. Erevik, accompanied by a small team of strategists and scientists, departed Veloria Prime aboard a swift diplomatic cruiser, journeying toward the previously dismissed Sol system. The journey was tense, filled with profound doubts. Would humanity accept their request, or laugh bitterly at the irony of the Consortium's newfound humility? Erevik himself was uncertain, yet determined. The Void Swarm pressed relentlessly forward, leaving no room for hesitation or pride. Upon reaching Earth's orbit, the Velorian vessel cautiously made its presence known. Humans, initially alarmed by the sudden arrival of an alien starship, quickly mobilized, their governments scrambling to react to this unprecedented event. World leaders watched in astonishment as Erevik's delegation stepped forward, humbled yet dignified, offering the first formal introduction of the Consortium to humanity. Erevik addressed the stunned human representatives openly. "We come to you humbled, aware of our past arrogance. Our civilization faces imminent destruction by an enemy that defies logic, strategy, and predictability. We once dismissed your people as chaotic, irrational primitives, but now those very traits might save us. We seek an alliance born of desperation and respect. Humanity's unpredictability is our last hope." Silence fell over humanity's leadership. Shock was evident, yet curiosity, defiance, and determination also emerged in their reactions. Human leaders quickly grasped both the irony and the magnitude of the request, and saw opportunity in the crisis. After brief deliberation, the humans responded, cautiously yet boldly, acknowledging both their initial resentment at being underestimated and their realization of the gravity of the situation. Humanity would indeed share their unpredictable creativity on equal terms. The Velorians were left with little choice but to accept humanity's condition. As Erevik's delegation departed Earth, the commander felt profound uncertainty mingled with cautious hope. He understood the implications. The Consortium had forever changed, forced into an uncomfortable alliance with those they had once scorned. Now, two civilizations previously worlds apart would have to unite, fusing logic with chaos to save the galaxy from the Void Swarm's unstoppable destruction. It was a gamble, a desperate decision made not from calculation, but from necessity. And yet it might be precisely what the galaxy needed to survive. It began with friction. The Velorians had never encountered a species quite like humanity, and humanity had never been approached as an equal by an intergalactic power. When the first joint military coordination meetings commenced aboard the Velorian flagship Luminary Accord, the tension was nearly tangible. The humans were scrappy, chaotic in appearance, language, and demeanor. They arrived wearing mismatched uniforms, speaking in layered metaphors, joking at inappropriate times, and asking questions that made the Velorian delegates audibly uncomfortable. Commander Erevik, now the uneasy bridge between both species, watched in silence as his own people flinched with each human deviation from protocol. But as the sessions progressed, something curious happened. The humans started proposing strategies, radical, unorthodox, and completely illogical by Velorian standards. Tactics that involved intentionally sacrificing precision for misdirection. Simulated retreat maneuvers to bait the Void Swarm. Attacks during planetary storms to mask thermal signatures. Using artificial chaos as a weapon. The Velorians were horrified and intrigued. Colonel Diana Mora, a battle-scarred veteran from Earth's Pacific Defense Fleet, took the lead. "You're trying to solve an organic problem with mechanical thinking," she said flatly during a particularly heated briefing. "The Void Swarm isn't a machine. It's not rational. You're playing chess while they're flipping the damn table." Erevic, always one to tread the line between tradition and pragmatism, requested simulations based on human proposals. The results were staggering. Scenarios where Velorian tactics failed predictably were suddenly disrupted by the erratic brilliance of human improvisation. Outcomes shifted dramatically when chaos was introduced as a variable, something Velorian simulations had never even considered. With permission granted from both governments, Operation Glasswire was greenlit, the first joint human-Velorian military strike. The mission targeted a void swarm hive nest that had consumed the moons of Hector 9. The human proposal was simple: confuse, disorient, mislead, and strike without pattern. Velorian ships provided heavy firepower and shields. Human forces supplied the erratic attack patterns and decoy ships, some of which broadcasted maddening audio frequencies, strange visual signals, and even pre-recorded emotional human dialogue loops. "What is love?" blared one human ship's loudspeakers in the middle of combat, followed by ancient pop music. Velorian commanders nearly shut the comms down until they realized it was working. The Void Swarm hesitated, wavered, broke formation. The human assault ships slipped through the momentary confusion and delivered targeted strikes to the hive core. For the first time since the war began, a significant swarm force was not just halted, but destroyed. Velorian analysts were left stunned. Debriefings revealed the source of humanity's advantage: an instinct for improvisation honed over centuries of internal conflict, coupled with a psychological resilience that allowed them to operate even in emotional or chaotic environments. Where Velorians sought order, humans thrived on reaction. A crisis was not something to be avoided, but an opportunity to act without a script. "You treat unpredictability as a threat," Mora explained. "We treat it as a tool." This success brought tension to the surface back in Velorian High Command. Erevic found himself summoned before a tribunal of traditionalist administrators on Veloria Prime. His critics accused him of destabilizing consortium purity and risking cultural contamination. "You would allow emotional instability into our core doctrine?" spat Minister Vexel. "These humans do not think, they feel. Their civilization is a tangle of contradictions." Erevic stood firm. "Yes, and that contradiction is precisely what the Void Swarm cannot model. That is why we need them." The tribunal paused. No rebuttal came. Data didn't lie. Operation Glasswire had provided something Velorian logic could not: victory. In the weeks that followed, human innovation spread like wildfire through the once immovable consortium ranks. Velorian engineers began studying human cybernetics and interface designs. Emotional data was, for the first time, added to mission planning. Elite consortium units were even assigned human liaisons, something unheard of before the Swarm War. The cultural impact was seismic. Younger Velorians, exposed to human behavior, began to question long-held beliefs. They listened to human music, chaotic, layered, emotionally charged. They read Earth literature, full of contradiction, ambiguity, and raw feeling. What once would have been dismissed as inefficient or irrational was now compelling. Not all welcomed the change. Protests emerged on several core worlds. Some Velorians feared that embracing humanity's way meant losing their own. But as more victories followed under human-inspired strategies, resistance weakened. Practicality triumphed over ideology. One such victory, codenamed Operation Black River, saw a joint fleet led by Mora and Erevic use a human-developed misdirection tactic. They created a trail of mock distress signals mimicking swarm prey behavior, luring a large segment of the Void Swarm away from a vital colony. The plan was high-risk, low-logic, and wildly effective. Afterward, Erevic stood beside Mora, watching the stars from the bridge of a human-Velorian hybrid cruiser. "I never thought we would find salvation in chaos," he admitted. Mora smirked, arms crossed. "That's the thing about chaos. It doesn't ask for permission. As the war evolved, so too did the relationship between the two species. Velorians grew to respect, if not fully understand, human intuition. Humans, in turn, began to appreciate the Velorians' unyielding commitment to precision, using it as a counterbalance to their own volatility. Together, they formed something new, not merely an alliance, but a synthesis, a fusion of logic and chaos, discipline and instinct. Yet even amid growing victories, questions remained. Was this alliance sustainable? Could two such fundamentally different civilizations truly coexist long-term? And if they succeeded against the swarm, what came next? For now, those questions could wait. The swarm still advanced, and the galaxy still burned. But for the first time in living memory, the Velorian Consortium didn't face the darkness alone. And perhaps, in embracing what they once rejected, they had discovered the one thing their logic never predicted: hope. The Velorian capital of Veloria Prime, once a bastion of unshakable order, was no longer the same. The influence of humanity, once scoffed at as a planetary footnote, had begun to ripple across the great consortium. In the corridors of power, debate had replaced certainty. In the military academies, improvisation drills were now practiced alongside centuries-old tactical doctrines. And on the streets, for the first time in generations, Velorians laughed. Not mechanically, not from polite custom, but from genuine amusement, often at strange human memes circulating across interstellar channels. It was a subtle transformation. Not chaos, not collapse, but something that frightened the old guard even more: change. Commander Erevic knew the cost of such change intimately. He had returned to Veloria Prime for a brief rotation from the front lines, only to find himself pulled into endless council meetings and political entanglements. He was no longer a mere commander. Now, to many, he had become the symbol of something bigger, a bridge between worlds, and to others a threat. The High Council chambers had grown more contentious with each passing week. What began as tentative cooperation with humanity had grown into operational dependence. With every battle won using human-led tactics, their influence expanded. Velorian purists seethed behind cold, polite expressions. They are undisciplined, Minister Vexel repeated for the third time that meeting. Their species relies on irrational decision-making, emotional impulses, and luck, and we have begun modeling ourselves after them. It is unsustainable, dangerous. Erevic remained calm, though his patience thinned. Luck did not destroy the swarm siege fleet at Ganithos. Improvisation did. Human intuition did. If it's irrationality that wins battles, perhaps we should learn to be less rational. A few council members nodded subtly, but many still clung to the old ways, unwilling to fully accept that their millennia-old supremacy had been built on a flawed foundation. Pride ran deep. Back on the front lines, cooperation looked different. Colonel Diana Mora and her joint operations team had been relocated to the Velorian Fortress Moon of Indara, a forward outpost deep within the contested zone. There, human and Velorian units drilled side by side, learning each other's rhythms and instincts, building something that resembled trust. It wasn't easy. Tensions erupted daily, over command protocols, over resource allocation, even over food. Velorian soldiers couldn't understand why humans insisted on eating comfort meals before combat, nor why they sometimes told jokes before boarding drop ships. Humans, in turn, mocked the Velorians' obsession with checklists and precision timing. But after each clash, something curious happened. They came back. Each side began to adapt, not just in strategy but in thought. Velorian officers began carrying small tokens: a photograph of family, a string of earth beads, a recorded snippet of music. Some even began using human nicknames, affectionately at first, then simply out of habit. One Velorian squadron, once decimated by a swarm ambush, had been reorganized under a human commander. They dubbed themselves the Logic Breakers and adopted a logo depicting a broken equation. They were the first to successfully recover a downed human pilot from deep swarm territory, risking their own mission to do it. Word spread. Stories of heroism across species lines began to outshine the Council's protests. Young Velorians began applying for positions in joint task forces. Even the most hardened human Marines started showing respect to the precision and unwavering focus of their Velorian counterparts. And still, the swarm advanced. The victories bought breathing room, but no permanent safety. Every time the swarm fell back, it did so with an eerie calm, regrouping in silence, reforming like a living storm. Whatever intelligence controlled it, if any, remained silent, invisible, and terrifyingly efficient. One particularly brutal encounter unfolded over the fractured remains of Drosari Station, a once bustling trade hub that had been consumed in mere hours by a void swarm assault. When a recon fleet arrived days later, all that remained was drifting metal and black residue. No life, no signals, no sound. Human and Velorian teams jointly investigated the wreckage. What they found chilled even more. There were signs of internal sabotage, systems rerouted with no apparent logic, security doors disabled in bizarre patterns. The conclusion was inescapable. The swarm had begun mimicking human behavior. They're learning, Morris said grimly, reviewing the data beside Aravik. They're starting to think more like us. Aravik's face was unreadable, but his voice was low. Then we must evolve faster than they can mimic. And we cannot do that alone. The pressure on the Consortium Council became unbearable. Reluctantly, they agreed to Mora's bold proposal, a permanent intergalactic joint command, IJC, housed on a neutral orbital station between Earth and Veloria Prime. It was historic. Velorian architects designed the station's framework. Human engineers made it messy but functional. The structure was asymmetrical, a shocking decision for the Velorians. Inside, the operations floor buzzed with multilingual chatter, emotional energy, and flashes of improvisation. It was unlike anything either civilization had ever built, a reflection of their strange, uneasy partnership. The IJC wasn't just military. Cultural exchanges began to flow. Earth universities received Velorian scholars. Velorian archives opened to human scientists. Even language began to merge in the command sphere, a messy, hybrid dialect the soldiers jokingly called Velglish. Of course, opposition still lingered. Extremist factions formed on both sides. On Earth, conspiracy theorists spread fear of Velorian mind control or domination plots. On Veloria, the old aristocracy whispered of corruption, of emotional contamination. Some warned that the swarm wasn't the greatest threat, the humans were. And yet the alliance endured. In quiet moments, Mora would sip Synthebrew with Aravik on the IJC balcony, staring out at the stars, at the space between where they had been and where they were going. "We're not friends yet," she said one night. "Not really, but we're bleeding together. That counts for something." Aravik nodded slowly. Perhaps trust does not begin with agreement. Perhaps it begins with shared wounds. The void swarm was still out there, growing, adapting. The final battle had yet to come. But something new now stood between the galaxy and annihilation. Two species, two histories, two ways of thinking, and one shared resolve. Unlikely allies, unavoidable unity. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the void swarm's emergence, the galaxy no longer teetered on the edge of collapse. Where once the Velorian Consortium had stood alone, dignified, arrogant, logical, it now stood side by side with a species that had, against all expectation, become its strongest ally, humanity. But the cost of survival was more than just battles and blood. It was identity. The Velorian Consortium, for all its unshakable tradition, now found itself in the midst of a cultural reckoning. What began as tactical cooperation had grown into a full-scale transformation of society. Human unpredictability had proven indispensable on the battlefield, but its influence was beginning to seep into civilian life. Velorian scholars, long confined to sterile debate within tightly controlled academic frameworks, were now publishing thought pieces titled with unthinkable phrases: "The Value of Emotion in Strategic Theory," "Chaos as a Catalyst," and even "The Poetry of War." a human perspective. Public archives opened to Earth media, novels, films, music. Velorian youths began quoting lines from Shakespeare and rapping in awkward but enthusiastic attempts at Earth's many dialects. The once despised concept of improvisation became a buzzword among entrepreneurial sectors on Veloria Prime. Innovation, once discouraged as deviation from the norm, became a new kind of status symbol. The old world was fading, and not everyone was ready to let it go. In the administrative circles of the inner consortium, opposition began to crystallize. The Preservation Bloc, as they called themselves, rallied under a simple credo: Velorian purity above all. They did not deny humanity's battlefield success, but they feared its creeping influence on their culture, their identity, and most of all, their future. "If we become them," said Minister Vexel in a broadcast leak from a private council session, "then we are already lost." The quote sparked debate across 1,000 worlds. Supporters of integration pointed to the fact that the consortium, had it stood alone, would have ceased to exist. Opponents, meanwhile, called for restrictions on human content, limits on joint governance, and the dissolution of the Intergalactic Joint Command. Caught in the middle were the very people who had forged the alliance: Commander Erevic and Colonel Diana Mora. In the IJC, they stood as symbols of unity. Erevic, now promoted to Supreme Strategist, had become something of a folk hero among young Velorians, respected not only for his military vision, but his bold break from traditional thinking. Mora, similarly elevated to Chief Combat Director, was a revered figure among Velorian troops. She had once been called a brute, a wild card, but now she was trusted, even by those who still struggled to understand her. And yet, even within their own alliance, there were cracks. Erevic noticed it in the briefings, Velorian captains beginning to grumble about undisciplined human subcommanders. Mora noticed it too, human soldiers beginning to question whether the consortium was secretly using the alliance to assert long-term control. The unity that had won battles was fraying under the pressure of politics and fear. It all came to a head during the Battle of Merax's Verge. The Void Swarm launched a surprise offensive across 4 sectors, deploying tactics eerily similar to those used in previous human-led strikes. It was the first undeniable proof that the swarm wasn't just observing, it was learning, assimilating, evolving. IJC Command scrambled to respond. Plans were thrown together rapidly, combining Velorian precision strikes with randomized human maneuvers. It should have worked, but in the chaos of real-time adaptation, Velorian subcommanders ignored their human counterparts' rapid changes. Orders conflicted, units crossfire zones, friendly fire incidents surged, and worst of all, the swarm exploited the confusion, splitting the joint fleet in 2 and wiping out several destroyers before retreating with minimal losses. It was the Alliance's first major defeat. Fallout was immediate. The Preservation Bloc demanded a return to pure Velorian command. On Earth, protests erupted against the consortium's arrogant mismanagement. Social media platforms were flooded with the trending phrase, "Trust broken." Inside the IJC, Mora and Erevic met in silence. "We were winning," Mora said softly, leaning on the edge of the observation deck. "And now we're slipping backward." "It is not war that tests alliances," Erevic replied. "It is peace between battles." "Then we're failing that test," she muttered. Erevic didn't disagree, but as always, he thought several moves ahead. He summoned both human and Velorian commanders to a new forum, not a war briefing, but a cultural exchange council. The idea was bold: open dialogue between military, political, and civilian representatives from both sides, with transparency, vulnerability, and, most controversially, emotional honesty. It was a disaster. The first session devolved into shouting. One Velorian administrator accused humans of being biologically inclined toward chaos. A human engineer responded by projecting a meme of Velorian architecture collapsing under its own symmetry. Yet Erevic refused to end the session. He let them argue. He let the emotions play out. And slowly, day by day, something shifted. They didn't start agreeing, but they started listening. When Mora took the floor a week later, she didn't bring data. She told a story about her first failure in command, about how she'd lost a squadron because she followed the playbook instead of her gut. She described the guilt, the fear, the sick feeling of knowing logic alone hadn't been enough. The room was silent. "I've learned from you," she said. "I've seen the power of precision, the elegance of order. But war doesn't care about elegance. War cares about survival. And survival is messy. It's emotional. We need both sides of the equation." That night, Erevik sent a private message to Mora. "They're starting to hear it. Keep speaking." The next month saw a series of reforms. IJC protocols were rewritten with dual input. Tactical planning now required both logical probability and intuitive counterweight. Psychological resilience training, once considered uniquely human, was introduced into Velorian academies. The preservation block's influence waned, not because it was defeated in debate, but because its relevance eroded. The galaxy had changed, and it wasn't going back. A new order was emerging, one that did not erase either culture, but fused them. Humans taught Velorians how to adapt under fire. Velorians taught humans how to see patterns in chaos. Together, they became something stronger. At the edge of known space, the Void Swarm began to regroup. Its silence was not retreat, but reinvention. A final confrontation loomed. But this time, the galaxy would not face it as divided factions. This time, they would face it as one. It began not with a battle, but with a whisper. Sensors on the farthest edge of IJC monitoring stations lit up with erratic signals. Gravitational anomalies, radiation spikes, planetary systems suddenly going dark. The Void Swarm was moving again, more coordinated than ever, more silent, more calculated. But something had changed. This was no longer the feral, chaotic force that had stormed the galaxy. It was something new, something colder, more adaptive. The Swarm had learned. It had studied humanity's unpredictability, absorbed Velorian logic, and merged both into a terrifying new synthesis. The final storm was coming. At the Intergalactic Joint Command, the mood was tense but focused. For all their fears, all the political fractures, humanity and the Velorian Consortium had held together. And now, on the eve of the ultimate confrontation, they stood unified. Mora leaned over the holodeck with her senior officers, human and Velorian alike, watching the simulation of enemy movements across 6 sectors. "They're hurting us," she said, eyes narrowed, "forcing our fleets inward." "It is a trap," confirmed strategist Ruvek, a young Velorian who had once openly questioned human involvement. "They intend to collapse our lines, eliminate us in one coordinated strike." "Which means," Erevik added quietly from the edge of the room, "we must do what they least expect." All eyes turned to him. "Disband the lines," he said. "Scuttle the structure. We scatter. Fight as fragments. Give the Swarm the chaos it thinks it has mastered, and then turn it against them." It was madness, and it was brilliant. Within hours, fleets were reorganized. Command hierarchies were loosened. Local commanders, once tightly tethered to centralized control, were given autonomy. Human tactical cells embedded across Velorian cruisers acted as improvisational guides, while Velorian strategic oversight ensured no front was truly left vulnerable. What unfolded over the next 6 days became known across the galaxy as the Shatterfront. It was not a battle in the traditional sense. There were no neat lines, no theaters of war. It was a chaotic storm of hit-and-fade strikes, decoy operations, misinformation campaigns, and seemingly random attacks that, to the Swarm, appeared uncoordinated. But it wasn't random. Behind the chaos was a rhythm. Human unpredictability wrapped in Velorian substructure. Every attack had purpose. Every retreat had a hidden vector. Every loss was bait. The Swarm, for the first time, faltered. Then came the opening, an exposed core cluster, a swarm neural relay hub buried inside a dead moon near the Olorn Abyss, untouchable by traditional means, but not by what the IJC had become. The operation, codenamed Helix Fall, was to be the final strike. Mora led the assault herself. Her fleet moved erratically, splitting into decoys and recon wings. Velorian battlecruisers disguised as drifting wrecks launched a surprise barrage that opened a breach in the swarm's outer shell. Meanwhile, a covert insertion team, a mixed human Velorian unit, slipped through the carnage and infiltrated the moon's core. The final confrontation was not fought with guns alone. Inside the neural core, the swarm spoke, not in words, but in overwhelming emotion: rage, hunger, fear, mimicry. It tried to overwhelm the team's minds with sensory overload, flooding them with hallucinations drawn from their memories. But they held, because humanity had taught the Velorians about emotional resilience, because Velorians had taught humans about mental discipline. Together, they moved through the storm of illusions and planted the device, a logic bomb seeded with unpredictability patterns, laced with neural subroutines designed to fracture the swarm's collective cognition. They didn't destroy the swarm. They made it implode. Cut off from itself, the swarm began to collapse. Hives turned on each other. Commands contradicted. Coordination vanished. Across the galaxy, fleets watched as the once unstoppable force began to disintegrate, its unified purpose unraveling like a severed mind. The war was over, not with the total destruction of the enemy, but with its failure to comprehend something it could not imitate: the harmony of opposites. Months passed. Wounds slowly began to heal. Across Velorian and human space, memorials were raised to honor the dead on both sides. Swarm battle remnants, once horrifying, were studied with cautious reverence, their forms now frozen in the silence of defeat. And the galaxy changed. The Velorian Consortium, no longer the sole authority, became part of something new. A galactic assembly formed from the Alliance: humans, Velorians, and dozens of minor species who had risen in the conflict's shadow. For the first time in remembered history, governance would be shared, not by logic alone, not by emotion alone, but by balance. There was tension, of course. Old habits did not vanish overnight. Political disputes flared. Cultural misunderstandings persisted. But the foundation held, because it had been forged not in diplomacy halls, but in fire. On Earth, Commander Erevic walked through a museum dedicated to the Alliance. He passed school children, human and Velorian, listening as a guide explained how the Shatterfront turned the tide of the war. No one recognized him, and that was how he preferred it. Outside, in the sunlight of a world he had once dismissed, he paused beneath a statue of two hands, one three-fingered and elegant, the other rough and five-fingered, clasped together. He heard someone beside him. "Mora, thought I'd find you here," she said, offering a lopsided grin. "Still trying to figure out what comes next?" "Always." They stood there a while, watching as two Velorian children played with a human ball, laughing in imperfect harmony. Mora broke the silence. "We changed the galaxy, you know." "No," Erevic replied. "We didn't." He gestured toward the children. "They will." And so it was. A new era, not defined by perfection or purity, but by complexity, by the mess of compromise, by the strength of differences, by a future that could no longer be predicted by equations or gut instinct alone, but built together. In the end, it was not logic that saved the galaxy, and it was not chaos. It was the uneasy, imperfect alliance between the two.